The Philadelphia Eagles may not be done making moves, and that's what makes this stretch before training camp so fascinating. While most teams around the NFL are simply preparing for camp to begin, there are growing questions about whether Howie Roseman still has another surprise waiting for Eagles fans. And two names have suddenly entered the conversation in a major way: Brandon Graham and Brian Thomas Jr. Let's start with Brandon Graham, because this is a story that hits differently for Eagles fans. We all know what Brandon Graham means to this franchise. This is not just another veteran player looking for a roster spot. This is a player who became one of the greatest Eagles of all time. He holds the franchise record for games played with 215, surpassing Jason Kelce, and he ranks third in Eagles history with 79.5 career sacks. Only Reggie White and Trent Cole are ahead of him. But statistics alone don't tell the full story. When Graham first arrived in Philadelphia, many people questioned whether he was the right draft pick. Some fans wanted Earl Thomas. Early in his career, injuries and inconsistency created doubts about his future. Instead of folding under the pressure, Graham transformed himself into one of the most beloved players this city has ever seen. And of course, nobody will ever forget the strip sack of Tom Brady in Super Bowl LI. That single play helped deliver the first Super Bowl championship in franchise history. Moments like that turn players into legends forever. What makes this situation especially interesting is that Graham already appeared to be finished. He announced his retirement only to return during the 2025 season when Philadelphia needed help along the defensive front. The Eagles had already made a major move by acquiring Jalen Phillips before the trade deadline, but Vic Fangio still wanted more depth and more pass rush production. That led to Graham returning on October 20th, and despite being brought back as a rotational piece, he made a real impact in only 113 total snaps, including 67 pass rush snaps. Graham recorded 3 sacks, 11 pressures, and 8 hurries. He contributed against both the pass and the run. More importantly, he gave Fangio flexibility. When injuries started affecting the defensive line, including issues involving Jalen Carter, Graham stepped in and provided valuable snaps both on the edge and inside. The timing of his arrival also mattered. After the additions of Jalen Phillips and Brandon Graham, Philadelphia's defense became one of the best units in football during the second half of the season. The Eagles developed into a top 5 defense after an uneven start, and Graham played a meaningful role in that turnaround. Now the question becomes simple: do the Eagles actually need him again? The defensive line remains one of the strongest groups on the roster. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Moro Ojomo provide tremendous talent inside. Jonathan Greenard and Jalix Hunt are expected to lead the edge rushers. Nolan Smith remains a proven contributor. AJ Epineza was added as another depth option. There are also younger players fighting for opportunities. On paper, Philadelphia looks solid, but championship teams don't usually stop at solid. They look for advantages. They look for insurance. They look for trusted veterans who already understand the system. And Brandon Graham checks every box. What's especially notable is what Graham recently said about his future. Unlike last season, he doesn't want to spend half the year waiting before joining the team. If he's coming back, he'd prefer to do it from the beginning. He wants a full training camp. He wants time to get comfortable. He wants to prepare the right way. At the same time, he admitted he's enjoying life. He's spending time with his family, working out, golfing, and embracing this stage of his life. But he also made it clear that if a return is going to happen, training camp could be the deadline. That puts the spotlight directly on Howie Roseman. Training camp is approaching quickly, and Graham appears to be signaling that the window for a decision may not stay open forever. The fascinating part is that this doesn't feel like a move driven by desperation. It feels like a move driven by opportunity. Philadelphia doesn't necessarily need Brandon Graham, but there is a strong argument that the Eagles could still benefit from having him in the locker room, in the defensive line rotation, and around a team that has championship aspirations once again. And if there's one thing Eagles fans have learned over the years, it's never to underestimate Howie Roseman when it comes to making aggressive moves before the season begins. With Brandon Graham's future suddenly back in the spotlight and another potential blockbuster storyline beginning to gain traction, the Eagles may not be finished shaping this roster just yet. What do you think, Eagles fans? Should Howie Roseman bring Brandon Graham back for one more season in Philadelphia? Or is it finally time for the franchise legend to close the book on his incredible career? The second storyline that could completely change the conversation around the Eagles heading into training camp involves a name that very few people expected to be connected to Philadelphia: Brian Thomas Jr. And this is where things get really interesting, because we're not talking about a depth player. We're not talking about a veteran rotational piece. We're talking about a receiver who not long ago looked like one of the brightest young stars in the NFL. The speculation surrounding Brian Thomas Jr. has been building throughout the offseason, and it all stems from an unexpected development in Jacksonville. After an outstanding rookie campaign, reports began surfacing that he wasn't completely happy with his situation. That immediately grabbed attention around the league because players with his talent level rarely become subjects of trade discussion so early in their careers. Think about what he accomplished when he first entered the NFL. After being selected in the first round out of LSU, he immediately emerged as Jacksonville's top receiving threat. Whether Trevor Lawrence was throwing him the football or another quarterback was under center, the production was there. The explosiveness was there. The big playability was there. He looked every bit like a future superstar. That is why the drop in production that followed raised so many questions. For many observers, it wasn't about talent. It wasn't about ability. It wasn't about physical tools. The belief remains that Brian Thomas Jr. still possesses the same elite upside that made him one of the most dangerous young receivers in football. So naturally, people begin asking a question. If a player of that caliber becomes available, should Howie Roseman get involved? If there is one thing we know about Roseman, it's that he never stops looking for opportunities. Throughout his career, he has built a reputation as one of the most aggressive general managers in football. He constantly searches for ways to improve the roster, whether through trades, free agency, draft maneuvering, or unexpected acquisitions. Many front offices around the league now operate similarly to the way Roseman has operated for years. Aggressive salary cap management, bold trades, constant roster improvement, never becoming comfortable. That philosophy is one of the reasons the Eagles remain contenders year after year. Now, would a trade for Brian Thomas Jr. actually happen? Nobody knows. But the idea gained traction because respected Eagles reporter Zach Berman was asked what move could potentially elevate Philadelphia even further. His response was fascinating. He acknowledged that the Eagles already possess one of the best rosters in the NFL. He also stated that if the offense improves and Jalen Hurts performs at a high level, Philadelphia already has Super Bowl potential. Yet despite saying that, he still mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. That matters. Berman isn't known for throwing random names into conversations. He has spent years covering the organization and understands how the Eagles think. When someone with that level of credibility brings up a player, fans pay attention. The reasoning is simple. Even though the Eagles already have a strong receiving group, Brian Thomas Jr. would provide something unique. Devonta Smith has already proven he can perform like a true number one receiver. His route running, versatility, and ability to create separation make him one of the most respected receivers in football. The Eagles also invested heavily in their receiver room and believe they have multiple contributors capable of helping the offense. But adding a talent like Brian Thomas Jr. would change the entire structure of the depth chart. Suddenly, defenses would be forced to account for another elite playmaker. Suddenly, the receiving core would become even deeper. Suddenly, matchups across the field would become more difficult for opposing secondaries. And that's what makes this conversation so intriguing. This isn't about fixing a weakness. This is about potentially turning a strength into a dominant advantage. Championship teams often think differently than everyone else. They don't wait for problems to appear. They try to create mismatches before the season even starts. Of course, making a move like this would come at a cost. Brian Thomas Jr. is still young. He was a first-round pick. Any team acquiring him would likely need to surrender significant assets. Beyond that, if he continues to develop, a future contract extension would almost certainly become part of the equation. Those are serious considerations, but when has Howie Roseman ever been afraid of making a bold move if he believes it improves the Eagles' chances of competing for another championship? That's why these rumors continue to generate discussion. On one side, you have Brandon Graham, a franchise icon who could return to strengthen the defense and provide leadership. On the other side, you have Brian Thomas Jr., a potential blockbuster acquisition who could add another explosive weapon to an already talented offense. Whether either move actually happens remains to be seen. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear as training camp approaches. The Eagles are not operating like a team that's satisfied. They're operating like a team that still believes improvements can be made. And if history has taught us anything, it's that Howie Roseman is often at his most dangerous when nobody expects another move to be coming. As training camp gets closer, what makes these discussions so important is that they reveal something about how the Eagles view themselves entering this season. This is not a rebuilding team. This is not a team hoping to sneak into the playoffs. This is a franchise that expects to compete at the highest level, and when organizations reach that point, every roster decision is viewed through a championship lens. That is why the Brandon Graham discussion carries so much weight. When you look at the current defensive front, there is already plenty of talent. Jalen Carter continues to be one of the most disruptive players on the roster. Jordan Davis remains a massive presence in the middle. Moro Ojomo has continued to earn opportunities. Jonathan Greenard is expected to be a major contributor off the edge, while Jalix Hunt is entering a season where many believe he could become one of the breakout players on the defense. Yet Brandon Graham offers something statistics cannot fully measure: experience, leadership, trust. When a coaching staff has a player who understands the system, understands the expectations, and has already proven he can contribute in critical moments, that player becomes extremely valuable. Remember, when Graham returned during the 2025 season, nobody expected him to carry a heavy workload. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to provide quality snaps, veteran leadership, and reliable production whenever his number was called. And that's exactly what happened. 3 sacks in limited action, 11 pressures, 8 hurries, strong run defense. Those numbers don't jump off the page compared to full-time starters, but when you consider the limited opportunities he received, the efficiency becomes impressive. The Eagles know exactly what